Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Laurie Smith on Blog Talk Radio. Good evening. It is 9:30 p.m. here in Calgary, Alberta. It's Friday night, January the 7th. I'm happy to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention. It's up to us. We're on for 30 minutes. It's a live internet streaming radio broadcast from blogtalkradio.com. And the chat room's open. I did pop the link into there, what I wanted to talk about tonight. I found these articles not too long ago, maybe a week or so ago, and was looking over some information about violent families, family violence, dysfunctional families. Wednesday night we were talking about dysfunctional families and what's a healthy family, what's a dysfunctional family look like, right? And now tonight I kind of wanted to take a look at these articles. I found these interesting. They're short little articles, but they, just bring out sort of a different set of information regarding family violence. And I'm studying all the time. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, as well as I'm into child rights and human rights, really, but mainly child rights, because children, unless we uphold their rights, they really have no rights. It's up to us to make sure that children's rights are protected, right? Adults, some, sadly enough, are not able to secure their own human rights, right? But children definitely need protection. They need someone standing up for their rights, for their life, for their right to life, for their right to safety, security, protection, shelter, food, like we're talking everything, right? So that's why I'm mainly interested in child rights, right? But this particular article's, I don't know, I do look at these quite a bit, and I'm always researching. I was going to school for a while, studying international community development, which really encompassed like human rights, child rights, and whatnot on an international level. And I couldn't afford to go any longer, but I thought, well, I'll just keep studying because I'd like to be able to return at one point and finish off my schooling at Mount Royal here in Calgary. So unfortunately, I couldn't afford to go anymore. I couldn't afford the courses, but I'm still studying. I'm still looking for information all the time, and because of what we do at Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, which is really promoting public awareness, education and awareness, so that people will know. What is child abuse, and why is this happening, and how can we prevent this? And what are children going through right now, right? And the importance of doing everything that we can, to stop child abuse and prevent child abuse and really all human rights abuses, right? So that's why I'm doing these shows. So you have to listen at your own discretion. I'm not a counselor or therapist or anything like that. I don't hold any certificates or degrees or anything like that. I'm just a survivor of child abuse myself, and grew up in a very dysfunctional, violent family, violent home. Abusive in every way, and I know what these kids are going through. So, as a survivor of child abuse, right, I wanted to do these shows really because I don't mind talking about this stuff. I did mind what was happening to me as a child. It really bothered me to be abused and to watch my whole family suffer like that, and all because, my parents wouldn't get help, and they wouldn't get help for their children, they wouldn't get help for themselves, and it was just a real lack of education on their part, and growing up abused themselves. So the cycle of violence was just repeated. And so it's very important for me to be a voice, right? And I wanted to be one more voice out here talking about this stuff with all the other voices. Thank God for everybody else who's doing this. And I just came in, alongside of them, right behind them to say, hey, I'm one more voice. So we can all do something, right? And so you have to listen at your own discretion, because I'm talking about all topics related to abuse, right, which are very sensitive. And so you have to know, what's going to make you uncomfortable. And if you find that this topic makes you uncomfortable, then you need to turn it off. That is your discretion completely. Young people under the age of 18, I just ask that you have permission to listen to my show from an adult, caregiver, a guardian, parent, somebody who hopefully cares about what you're doing online. My shows are mainly about stopping child abuse, but there's a lot of adult content on my shows, and anytime there's a chat room presence, I really believe that young people under the age of 18, you need to be very careful what you're doing online. And because I'm working, with everybody else here who volunteers for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and a whole lot of other advocates, around the world trying to save children's lives and trying to protect children, I feel that I have to say that on every show, because I don't know how young the people are who are listening, and I don't know, these players can be placed around on different websites, right? So I don't know who's listening, how young the people are who are listening, and if you're a young person under the age of 18, I just ask that you have someone who you trust and who's proven themselves trustworthy to listen to the show with you, who's an adult who can help you make the decision whether you should be listening or not. Thanks very much. You'd be doing me a favor and yourself a favor. And get the information on how to keep yourself safe online. It's really easy. Just type into your browser internet safety for children, online safety for children, internet safety, anything like that. And it will bring up websites that will, kind of give you some pointers if you already don't know this on how to keep yourself safe online, right? What to do, what not to do in a chat room situation, and how to keep yourself safe so that you don't become a victim of a child sexual predator or pedophile who's online trying to get a hold of children so they can sexually use them or assault them or exploit them in some manner. You don't want to be a victim of a child sexual predator or pedophile, let me tell you that. So you want to keep yourself safe. So if you're a young person, make sure you get the information, keep yourself safe, and then pass it on to your friends, right? Thanks, everybody, for being here. I've got my good friend Gypsy Witch here from Australia. I got volunteer, one of the directors for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children here tonight, Sandra McLeish. Hello, Sandra. And glad everybody can be here. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. I know a lot of people have other things that they have to be doing on any given night, and I just appreciate everybody who's taking the time to pop in and listen to my shows. I really appreciate it. I almost have 19,000 shows listened to. That's awesome. I never realized that many people would listen to my shows, and I didn't realize how many shows I'd be doing when I first started this a year ago, last November, right? So I was trying to go for maybe 300 shows or something per this last year, but I ended up with 520 shows or something like that. But thank you so much for tuning in, because it wouldn't really be worth much for me to sit here and just talk to myself. So I appreciate everybody who's tuning in, and thank you all for the support. It really does mean a lot to me, so thanks very much. So this particular article, I did pop this into the chat room, and this is some stuff I just pulled up recently. It's called, it's the Library Index, www.libraryindex.com. And you can go through there, and they have this one section called Social Issues and Debate Topics. And then the next thing you would click on would be Causes and Effects of Child Abuse. And then some contributing factors to child abuse: the violent family, abusive mothers, abusive fathers, abusive siblings, right? I really wanted to look at this because this very much is what I grew up with, right? A violent family, abusive parents, and abusive siblings, right? So pretty sad, but that's the way it goes in a lot of families, and that's the whole issue. It is a huge problem for children who grow up in a violent home. There can be abuse, and there maybe not always, but it does kind of escalate the possibility for abuse, for child abuse and whatnot. So it's very important for me to talk about this stuff, because many children do grow up in violent homes, and they go to violent schools, which I did. The schools that I went to were pretty violent, and the neighborhoods I was living in were pretty violent. So violence was just kind of part of my life, and right up until I hit about the age of 21, 22, and really thought back about all the violence that I had seen in my lifetime, and all the murders and the deaths and the people getting killed and my friends getting stabbed and killed, and brothers. One of my brothers was murdered, and just really a lot of violence, a lot of craziness in my life. And I thought, my God, I've had such a violent life. I've just experienced so much violence, and I wanted to just change that. So at the age of 21, really, I stopped using drugs, and I started to really focus on changing my behaviors. And I thought, I don't want to be a violent person. I don't want to live a violent life, and that's really where I started to work on myself, was about the age of 21. And it took me till the age of 41 to even begin my healing journey. So I went another 20 years of really not being able to heal from my past. And then at the age of 41, just 4 years ago, really, that's when I began my healing journey. So it's been a long road. I would hope people wouldn't wait that long to reach out and get some help like I did. It's really unfortunate. I now wish that, looking back on it, that I had gotten some help a lot sooner, because I would have been feeling a lot better a long time ago, I think. But, you can't go back and change the past, but you can certainly change right where you were at. You know what I mean? So I'm glad that I did decide 4 years ago to actually start allowing myself to begin this healing journey, right? So they say on this page here, causes and effects of child abuse, the violent family, spousal conflicts, right? They talk about the spousal conflicts. It says child abuse is sometimes a reflection of other forms of severe family conflict. Violence in one aspect of family life often flows into other aspects. Murray A. Strauss and Christine Smith found that parents who were in constant conflict were also more likely to abuse their children. And that's from Family Patterns in Child Abuse, Physical Violence in American Families, Risk Factors and Adaptations to Violence in 8,145 families. So this is a particular article or research paper or something done by Murray A. Strauss and Christine Smith. And they said that they found that parents who were in constant conflict were also more likely to abuse their children. And just my firsthand know this, because my parents were in constant conflict from the time I was born, but before I was born. So I grew up in this. This is what I grew up in, and there was never a time where there was any peace in my life or in my home growing up. And the only time there was any peace was pretty much anything that looked or resembled peace was when my parents were not in the same room together. If they were in the same room together, there was going to be problems, right? So as long as they were in their own separate rooms, it seemed to be, there could be almost a feeling of peace, you know what I mean? But not real peace, right? Sadly enough, lots of kids live like that, and is it the kids' fault? Is it the children's fault? The baby's fault? No, it's the parents' fault. It's whoever the caregivers, the guardians, the parents, the adults in the situation, right? To make sure that they're not bringing up their children in a violent, situation full of conflict and abusive, behaviors, right? It's absolutely ridiculous that people think, oh, well, the kids aren't being affected when, they are. And it's just really it's a lack of education is all it is. And it's a cycle of abuse. It keeps getting passed on family to family, right? The researchers measured the level of husband-wife conflict over such issues as money, sex, social activities, housekeeping, and children. The child abuse rate for fathers involved in high marital conflict was 13 per 100 children compared to 7.4 per 100 children for other men. Almost double. Mothers in high conflict relationships reported an even higher child abuse rate, 13.6 per 100 children versus 8 per 100 children among mothers in lower conflict homes. So, yeah, that's pretty bad. I mean, it just shows that for that study done, it did escalate the situation when they were in high marital conflict. And my parents, you want to talk about high marital conflict. I mean, my God, it was like a nightmare. Their marriage was just like, I don't know. I mean, it's almost hard to describe the level of hatred that those two people had for each other while I was growing up with them, and they were just so determined to ruin each other's lives. Like, mainly my mom was just fighting back after all the years of abuse that she took from my dad, which she should have got out, and she had every opportunity to get out. And I talk a lot about that on my shows, but it's just that it's unfortunate to see that, because what she did was she was like, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And my mom was abused as a child as well, so she became very highly abusive, and she already probably had the potential because she was abused and then ended up in this abusive marriage and really thought I don't think she meant to become a child abuser. My parents were both brought up on child abuse charges, right? But the thing is I don't think that it was their goal when they got married. Hey, we'll get married and then we'll just abuse our kids. We'll have a bunch of kids and we'll abuse them. I'm sure they did not set out to do that, but they did not get any help. And even when the courts ordered them to get marital counseling for their marital issues, as well as their own issues, because both my parents were abused as children, right? So they ordered my parents to get their own counseling because they were both psychologically messed up. My dad was diagnosed borderline schizophrenic at that time when they were brought up on abuse charges, and my mom was diagnosed manic depressive at the time. So, and they would say, okay, you guys got to get help separately for your own issues, as well as you need marital counseling, as well as you need family counseling, and you need counseling for your children, right? And did they do it? Well, they went to 2 sessions, and my older siblings said that they went to 2 sessions too, and I was just a toddler, so I'm sure I went too, but I don't remember it. I was 2 years old. I do remember the social workers coming around afterwards, but I don't remember going to the particular meetings. So, but I was told and by my parents and my siblings that they went to two meetings, and that was it. I guess they figured that should be enough, right? But sadly enough, the system, we just slipped through the system, and the abuse just continued and got worse, right? It's very sad what happens to people, and this is absolutely preventable if everybody would straighten up, and get some help. And it's sad that people just can't stop hurting each other, because basically that's what it all comes down to. Like my dad, like, he's psychologically ill, right? So for him, I don't know how he would have been able to treat my mother right, because he's psychologically ill. I mean, he's really messed up. And my mom, why she would stay with him, I don't know. You know what I mean? Thinking that there was no other life for her. And she used to say stuff like that. She'd be like, well, this is just my life, and then she'd be talking about killing herself and committing suicide or killing us or whatever. And, it's very sad when people get to that state where they can't even clearly think about what's really happening in the situation. She had every opportunity to get out and could have got out and taken her children with her or let us go. Right, I mean, when they were brought up on abuse charges, they could have at that point just let us go, And but for some, my mom didn't want to look like a bad mother because her mother was horrible, killed one of her own sons, and was just a horrible, abusive woman. And my grandmother. And so she didn't want to look like her mother. She wanted to be a better mother than her mother, for sure. I know this because she used to talk about my grandmother, and I mean, I met my grandmother, and she used to say, what my grandmother had done to her and to the other siblings, and to my aunts and uncles, right? And she would say, that she would be a better mother than her mother, right? And she turned out to be pretty much exactly like her mother. Right? She turned out to be just as highly abusive as her own mother, right? Because she let that cycle get to her. She just fell into it, you know what I mean? And didn't try to change it, right? And that's really sad because, our family was destroyed because of that, right? Spousal verbal aggression and child abuse. Husbands and wives sometimes use verbal aggression to deal with their conflicts. The 1985 National Family Violence Resurvey found that spouses who verbally attack each other were also more likely to abuse their children. Among verbally aggressive husbands, the child abuse rate was 11.2 per 100 children, compared with 4.9 per 100 children for their other husbands. And verbally aggressive wives had a child abuse rate of 12.3 per 100 children, compared to 5.3 per 100 children for other wives. Right? So it's incredibly, much higher number of child abuse rates when there was verbal aggression, verbally aggressive spouses, right? And I mean, I just know what I grew up with, right? I'm not going to go into details here on the show, but if you want to check my book out, I did detail some of it in my book, A Life of Death, The Redemption. It was a blog. I was writing a blog, and I would just come home and write this blog at night after work, and I just, when it had to come out, it would come out, and I would just leave it. I wouldn't edit it. I wouldn't change it. I would just put it out there for the public to see it, and it would be done. Then I'd move on to the next chapter, right? It got published. Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. President Donna Shear saw it and said that needs to be published. It needs to be a book, and so they went ahead and published it. And they left it in my words, which is awesome, and didn't change it. Just left it in my own words, which is great. Let my voice be heard, and so yeah, it's just awesome. So I donated the proceeds to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. So if anybody does pick up one of those books, all the proceeds are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children to help, to help fund getting the brochures out, getting the information out, and just to help fund the projects that will be happening, right? So just know that money's going for a really good cause, right? I didn't want the money for that book, right? And so that's just awesome. And I wrote another book too, just recently, actually, the La Vida Juvie. It's also another part of my story. It's just like it's more of an bioptic look at one summer and with my friends and the abuse that I was suffering, and even my friends were suffering. And it's just a short little read for teens, really, but that the proceeds for that book are also going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. So both of my books, all the money's going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. That's the way I wanted it. They didn't want it that way, but I did, and so they allowed it. So that's very cool. And so they said here that Strauss and Smith, the two people that did this study, believed that verbal attacks between spouses, rather than clearing the air, tended to both mask the reason for the dispute and create further conflict. And the resulting additional tension made it even harder to resolve the original source of conflict. Well, that's the problem, right? I mean, once people start screaming at each other and cursing at each other, verbally attacking each other, it's real hard to come back from that. Because then there's hurt feelings, there's resentment, there's added tension, Whereas if people would actually learn how to communicate properly, it's very important. Communication is huge. It's so important. And, I mean, I grew up with this stuff, so I totally know what it's like to be verbally assaulted, verbally abused, right? And listening to my parents do that to each other, and then to have them do that to their children and to me, it was an incredibly stressful situation to be around, because with the verbal attacks would always come the physical violence. So there would be physical violence as well as verbal attacks going on. It's not like parents usually, if they're going to beat on their children, they're not going to say, "Oh, I just love you, son," and then kick the crap out of them, right? I mean, they're generally going to call them names and be cursing and screaming and yelling. I mean, that's what I grew up with, right? Not somebody saying, "Oh, I just love you," and then slap you around, right? I mean, you're going to hear, it's a verbal assault as well, right? So, I mean, it just adds to the problem. It just totally, it almost just escalates it. Right, and that's why the abuse rates are higher, the child abuse rates are higher. Verbal abuse of children. It says parents who verbally abuse their children are also more likely to physically abuse their children. Oh, that's what they go on to talk about here. Respondents to the 1975 1985 National Family Violence Survey who verbally abused their children reported a child abuse rate 6 times that of other parents. So 21 versus 3.6 per 100 children. That's a lot. That's a big difference. The 1985 survey found that verbally abusive mothers physically abused their children about 9 times more than other mothers. So that's pretty high. Fathers who were verbally aggressive toward their children physically abused their children more than 3 times as much. So the women, the mothers, more than 9 times more were abused their children 9 times more than other mothers. If they were also verbally abusing them, then they were also physically abusing them 9 times more. So that's just really bad. Spousal physical aggression and child abuse. It says in Family Patterns in Child Abuse, Strauss and Smith reported that one of the most distinct findings of the 1985 National Family Violence Resurvey was that violence in one family relationship is frequently associated with violence in other family relationships. So in families in which the husband struck his wife, the child abuse rate was much higher, 22.3 per 100 children, than in other families, which was 8 per 100 children. So that's huge, big difference. Similarly, in families in which the wife hit the husband, the child abuse rate was also considerably higher, 22.9 per 100 children, than in families in which the wife did not hit the husband, which was 9.2 per 100 children. So it just tells you that, if there's spousal physical aggression, spousal like domestic violence and abuse, right, it does cause problems because a lot of people, lash out at their children as well. If they're abusing the spouse, they don't always abuse the children, but it's just that it increases the factors, It increases the numbers, right? A lot of people say, I've actually, read lots of stuff out there since I do the research, and we're always researching for Dream Catchers for Abused Children, all of us, that domestic violence and abuse, many times, parents and whatnot, they say, oh, well, the children weren't affected because they were just in the bedroom and they really didn't witness any of the abuse and they didn't see any of the physical abuse. Then they didn't really know what was going on, right? That's what people believe. That's what people who are in these domestic violence and abuse situations believe, that the children don't know what's going on. But see, the whole thing is children have ears, they have eyes, they can see, they can feel the tension, they can feel the fear, they can feel the danger, that it's not safe, that their mother or their father's not safe, that they're not safe, And if they see that their mother or their father's being abused, because hey, women do abuse men. It's way more men that abuse women, that's for sure. But we do know, that men are victims in this as well. And so, it's just sad that people do this to each other, right? And then think, oh, it's not affecting the children. It affects unborn babies. They did figure that one out. It even it affects unborn children that are still in the womb, that haven't been born yet. And they've done the studies to find out that the stress and the tension from that, even if there's no physical violence, and it could just be emotional, psychological abuse, right, which a lot of people don't think is a big deal, right? People say, oh, well, he didn't hit me, but he just calls me names, and he just says this, or the husband could say, well, the wife is carrying the baby. But let's just say it's a woman, abusing a man. Man could say, well, she didn't hit me. She was just, calling me names and putting me down and threatening to do certain things, take the children away or whatever, right? These things are very stressful. A lot of people don't realize what emotional, psychological abuse does to people. They think they really kind of associate domestic violence and abuse with just being physical violence, right? Without even thinking about the fact that the real, the damaging stuff is what's going on in the heart. It's the stuff that kills you inside. It's that whole emotional, psychological damage, really, that just is so hard to heal from because, physical violence is too, right? It has a huge impact on a person's body and mind and spirit. But so does emotional and psychological abuse. So a lot of people think that it's no big deal, if it's not physical abuse. But actually, all abuse is incredibly wrong, and it's all the same. It doesn't matter to me what kind it is. It's all so wrong, right? And and people think, oh, it's not affecting the children. Yes, it is. And you just have to get out there and read the material and do the research, right? The information is out there, right? So they go on to say, in risk of physical abuse to children of spouse abusing parents, Child Abuse and Neglect, Volume 20, Number 7, January 1996. Susan Ross, who did further research based on the 1985 National Family Violence Resurvey, reported that marital violence was a statistically significant predictor of physical child abuse. And Ross noted that the probability of child abuse by a violent husband increased from 5% with one act of marital violence to near certainty with 50 or more acts of spousal abuse. The percentages were similar for violent wives. So really, that's just the whole issue. If there's spousal abuse going on, then you can pretty much guarantee that there will be some child abuse in the home of some sort. Not always, because we know that in some cases it's just not the way it is, right? But we know from the reports that come in and from the studies that are done and from the different the headlines that are out there that pop up every periodically, and which are really sad. You know what I mean? That children are being abused in these situations, right? And it's just so. And I'm a survivor, so I know this, right? But I just know that others are too, and it's very, very sad. So they go on to say that Ross found that of those husbands who had been violent with their wives, 22.8% had engaged in violence toward their children. And similarly, 23.9% of violent wives had engaged in at least one act of physical child abuse. And these rates, so that's, 23.9%, almost 24%. So these rates of child abuse were much higher than those of parents who were not violent toward each other, which was 8.5% for fathers and 9.8% for mothers. That was based on that study that they did with 8,145 families, right? So in other words, the more frequent the spousal violence, the higher the probability of child abuse. And I just know that in our home, it was just not a good thing because growing up, in that situation, I mean, if my parents were fighting, then my brothers, my older siblings, would try to help my mom. And, of course, that would cause my dad to physically abuse them because he would get mad because they were trying to stick up for my mom. And then when I got older, I took that role on after my brothers moved out and died and whatever else happened to them. And then I grew up and was the last one in the home and was still continuing to try to do that and be the buffer and sort of keep my parents from killing each other. And the abuse just, passed on to me, right? But I had already been being abused, right? So that's the issue. Was just, it's just you take on these roles, right, within these families, these dysfunctional, violent families. I mean, there's quite often that's the situation, right? And the kids end up paying the price for it. You bet they do. All because the parents cannot and will not, for whatever reason, get help or separate or do whatever they need to do, right, to make sure that their children are not being hurt and their children are not involved in this, because it's horrible to grow up like that. So psychological abuse, family dynamics, they go on to talk about this as Marie-Hélène Gagne and Camille Bouchard sought to determine the family characteristics that predispose parents to psychologically abuse their children, and that was from Family Dynamics Associated with the Use of Psychologically Violent Parental Practices, Journal of Family Violence, Volume 19, Number 2, April 2004. So I haven't seen these documents, right, but this is what they're talking about. Based on interviews with parents experiencing difficulties in their relationships with their children, parents with no apparent or acknowledged difficulties in practitioners, the researchers gathered examples of psychological violence from parents who had experienced it and from practitioners who had come in contact with different family situations. So they did the research, based on two different groups, right? One based on interviews with parents experiencing difficulties in their relationships with their children, and then parents with no apparent or acknowledged difficulties at all, right? And then they took a look at their practitioners, the researchers who gathered the examples of this, psychological violence from parents who had experienced it, and from the practitioners who had come in contact with these different family members, right, different family situations. So the researchers identified 4 family characteristics that are likely to result in parental psychological violence. And the first involves a scapegoat child who may be difficult from other family members, or may be different from other family members by his or her unattractiveness, slow mental abilities, or disability. The scapegoat may be an unwanted child, the child of a former spouse, or an adopted child. And this child is typically neglected by the parents who favor his siblings or her siblings, right? And he is treated or she is treated harshly and excluded from family intimacy. So this can happen. So they go on to talk about this. I hope you will check this out. That's from www.libraryindex.com. And causes and effects of child abuse. And then you just follow the links to the violent family. They go on to discuss a whole lot of stuff, and there's many, many pages associated with this stuff. If you guys are interested in this, just take a look at that link and follow these links, because there's lots and lots of info here. So thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I appreciate you being here and spending this time with me. It's just awesome. I'll be back on the weekend. You can check my show pages, and I'll be back on next week, Monday morning, one child abuse survivor to another. if you need something, get a hold of me on Blog Talk Radio or Facebook, where whatnot. I'll be around. And just take care of yourselves. If you're suffering and you're being abused in any way, whether you're an adult or a young person, you make sure you get some help. You reach out and talk to somebody. If you're having a hard time coping, and you need resources and you just need to know, what to look for or how to get some help. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not a counselor or a therapist, but I'm a friend, and I've been there and I know what it's like. So I would say keep reaching out, and you have to hold on, and make sure you get yourself some help. You know what I mean? If you know somebody who is being abused, a child, right, you make sure you do the right thing and make the phone call. And if you suspect it, you should still make the phone call, right? We want to save children's lives, right? So do whatever you can to do that. And have a great night, everybody. Take good care of yourselves, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.